God ice inviting you to lay down the weight you've been carrying. This ice the moment your heart finally finds peace. There are moments in a human life when the soul grows tired long before the body ever does. You may still rise each morning, fulfill your duties, answer your obligations, and speak the expected words, yet inside there is a quiet ache that refuses to be soothed. It is not the ache of one single sorrow, nor the sharp pain of a recent loss, but the dull and constant pressure of carrying too much for too long. It settles into the heart like an unspoken burden, heavy not because it is dramatic, but because it has been endured silently. And it is to this very place, this hidden chamber of weariness, that God now speaks with gentle authority and unyielding. Kindness. For many have learned, often without realizing it, to live as though strain were a virtue and exhaustion a badge of honor. We tell ourselves that if we stop striving, everything will collapse, that if we loosen our grip even for a moment, the world will fall apart in our hands. So we clutch our worries like possessions, guard our fears as though they were necessary tools, and shoulder our responsibilities that were never meant to rest upon us alone. Over time, the heart forgets what lightness feels like. Peace begins to seem like a foreign land spoken of only in stories, beautiful but unreachable. Yet God has never asked the human heart to be a storage room for endless anxiety. He has never required the soul to be a fortress held together by sheer willpower. From the beginning, the invitation has always been one of trust rather than tension, of surrender rather than strain. The tragedy is not that the burdens exist, for life in a broken world ensures that they will, but that so many believe they must carry them unaided, as though divine strength were reserved only for the final moments and not for the daily grind. Consider how easily we confuse responsibility with control. Responsibility asks us to act faithfully in the present moment, while control demands that we predict and manage outcomes that belong to tomorrow. The first is human, the second is an attempt to play God, and it is this subtle shift from faithful action to anxious control that quietly crushes the spirit. We replay conversations that have already ended, rehearse disasters that have not yet arrived, and condemn ourselves for failures that grace has already forgiven. In doing so, we place upon our shoulders a weight that was never designed for human bone and muscle to bear. God's invitation, then, is not a rebuke but a release. He does not stand before you with folded arms and disappointed eyes. He comes with open hands, asking not for more effort, but for honesty. You are tired, his voice says. Aims to say, not with accusation, but with understanding. And you are tired because you have been carrying what I never asked you to hold alone. There is a profound kindness in being seen so clearly, especially when one has grown accustomed to hiding exhaustion behind competence. The difficulty, of course, lies in the act of laying the burden down. For burdens, once carried long enough, begin to feel like part of us. We fear that without them we might lose our sense of purpose, our identity, or our perceived worth. If we are not the one, holding everything together, who will we be? And yet, this fear reveals how deeply we have misunderstood the nature of our value. Worth was never meant to be measured by how much weight one can endure, but by how deeply one can be loved. And love, by its very nature, requires openness rather than strain. Peace does not arrive by the force of human determination. One cannot wrestle their way into nor argue their heart into stillness. Peace comes as a gift, and like all true gifts, it must be received with empty hands. This is why God's invitation begins not with doing, but with laying down. Before there can be renewal, there must be release. Before the heart can find peace, it must be willing to admit its weariness without shame. There is something profoundly counterintuitive about divine rest. The world teaches that relief comes after resolution, that peace is the reward for success, and that rest must be earned through relentless effort. God, however, offers rest at the very point of exhaustion, peace in the midst of uncertainty, and assurance long before circumstances improve. This does not mean that difficulties vanish or responsibilities evaporate, but it does mean that his soul no longer carries them alone. The load is redistributed, not eliminated, shared with a strength that does not falter under pressure. Think of how a child carries a heavy object until a parent notices the strain and reaches out to help. The child does not become less responsible by accepting assistance. Rather, they learn trust. In much the same way, God's invitation is not an insult to man capability, but an education in divine companionship. To lay the burden down is not to abandon effort, but to refuse isolation. It is the quiet acknowledgement that strength finds its fullest expression when it knows where to lean. Many resist this invitation because they fear disappointment. They have hoped before and felt let down, prayed before and seen no immediate change. Over time, self begins to feel risky, like leaning on a railing that might give way. So the heart hardens, choosing the certainty of strain over the vulnerability of trust. Yet this guardedness, though understandable, slowly suffocates the soul. For a heart closed to disappointment is also closed to delight, and a spirit armored against pain is likewise armored against peace. God does not demand that you manufacture trust out of thin air. He asks only for willingness, the smallest opening through which grace can enter. Even a hesitant surrender, offered with trembling hands, is enough to begin the work of rest. Peace does not flood the soul all at once. It seeps in gradually, like light through a window at dawn. At first it is barely noticeable, a subtle easing of tension, a momentary quiet where always once reigned. But given time and permission, it grows, reshaping the inner landscape until what once felt impossible becomes familiar. It is important to understand that laying the burden down does not mean denying pain. On the contrary, it requires facing pain honestly, without the false comfort of self-sufficiency. God is not impressed by stoicism, he is drawn to truth. When the heart finer lie admits, I cannot carry this anymore, it has not failed. It has arrived at the precise place where grace can do its deepest work. For grace, by definition, meets us not at the height of our strength, but at the edge of our limitation. There is a sacred exchange that occurs in this moment of surrender. What you lay down, God takes up. What you release, he sustains. The anxiety that kept you awake, the regret that haunted your thoughts, the fear that whispered of impending disaster, all of it is met by a presence that neither panics nor withdraws. God does not promise to explain every mystery or resolve every tension immediately, but he does promise to remain, and often it is this unshakable presence, rather than any sudden solution, that restores the heart to peace. Peace, after all, is not the absence of trouble, but the praise of trust. It is the quiet confidence that one is held, even when the path ahead remains unclear. This kind of peace does not shout, it settles. It does not demand attention, it steadies the soul from within, and once tasted, even briefly, it awakens a longing for deeper rest, a recognition that the frantic pace, once accepted as normal, was never meant to be permanent. As the heart begins to loosen its grip on control, something remarkable happens. Perspective returns. Problems that once loomed like giants are seen in proportion, not because they have shrunk, but because God has grown larger in the imagination of the soul. Fear loses its monopoly on the future, and hope, though still cautious, begins to speak again. The mind grows quieter, not empty, but focused. The heart, once crowded with worry, finds space to breathe. Yet this process is rarely linear. There will be moments when the old habits return, when the burden is picked up again almost unconsciously. This is not failure, but practice. Learning to rest is as much a discipline as learning to strive, and it often requires patience with oneself. God does not rescind his invitation each time you falter. He repeats it gently, persistently, with a tenderness that does not tire. Each time you notice the weight and choose to release it again, you strengthen the muscle of trust. It is here, in this ongoing rhythm of surrender and renewal, that the heart begins to change. No longer defined by constant pressure, it grows more spacious, more resilient, more alive. Joy, once overshadowed by worry, finds room to return. not as fleeting excitement, but as a steady undercurrent of gratitude. Even sorrow, when it comes, no longer overwhelms, for it is held within a larger context of meaning and care. And still, God's invitation continues, pressing gently but firmly against the places you guard most closely, asking whether you are ready to lay down not just obvious anxieties, but the deeper weights of guilt, resentum, and self-reproach. These too exhaust the soul, often more than external pressures ever could. To carry unforgiven guilt is to live perpetually bent beneath a load that grace has already offered to remove. To cling to resentment is to grip a stone that only hardens the heart that holds it. Peace requires courage, for it asks us to trust that what we release will not destroy us, but free us. It challenges the narrative that says, we are only safe when we are in control, only valuable when we are indispensable, only strong when we never rest. God's truth speaks differently. It declares that you are safest when you are held, most valuable when you are loved, and strongest when you are willing to lean. As you stand at this moment, this quiet crossroads between carrying and releasing, there is no dramatic ceremony required, no elaborate words, no perfect posture of faith. The invitation is simple, though not easy, to lay down what you have been carrying and allow your heart, perhaps for the first time in a long while, to rest without apology. This is not the end of effort, nor the abandonment of responsibility, but the beginning of a different way of being. One rooted not in relentless strain, but in enduring trust. And as this trust slowly takes root, you may begin to notice a subtle shift within you, a sense that peace is no longer merely an idea to be admired from afar, but a presence drawing nearer, closer than you once believed possible, waiting patiently as your heart learns, step by step, how to loosen its grip and remain open to what God is still unfolding in ways that cannot be forced but only received. There is a quiet wisdom in recognizing that the soul was never designed to be driven like a machine. Machines can be pushed until they break. Souls, when pushed beyond their limits, simply grow numb. God's invitation is not merely to stop striving, but to awaken again, to feel without fear, to hope without bracing for disappointment, to live without the constant tightening of the inner self. Many discover, once they dare to set the burden down, that much of their exhaustion came not from the events themselves, but from the meanings they attached to them. They believed that every failure defined them, that every delay was a verdict, that every unanswered prayer was a sign of neglect. Yet God has always been more patient than our interpretat. Ions, more generous than our conclusions. When the weight is released, even temporarily, clarity returns, and the heart begins to see that it was never abandoned, only invited to trust beyond what it could see. There is a particular peace that comes from realizing that God's work does not depend upon your constant anxiety. The world does not spin on the axis of your worry, nor does the future wreck your sleepless nights to arrive safely. This realization is both humbling and liberating. It humbles the ego that believed it must hold everything together, and it liberates the soul to rest in a strength greater than its own. Such rest does not make one passive, it makes one present, and presence, grounded in peace, often accomplishes more than frantic effort ever could. As the heart begins to rest, it also begins to listen differently. Noise that once dominated the inner life gradually fades, replaced by a quieter, steadier awareness of God's nearness. This nearness does not always announce itself with emotional spectacle. Often it arrives as steadiness, as the simple sense that you are not alone in the moment you are living. The mind grows less crowded, and thoughts no longer rush past like a relentless tide. Instead, they slow, allowing wisdom to surface where panic once reigned. It is here that many realize how long they have lived at war with themselves. They demanded perfection where growth was needed, punishment where mercy was required, and certainty where faith was meant to dwell. Carrying such internal conflict is exhausting beyond measure. God's invitation extends even to this inner battlefield. offering reconciliation not only with circumstances, but with the self. To lay down the burden is also to lay down self-contempt, that quiet voice insisting you are never enough. Peace cannot coexist with relentless self-accusation. One must give way for the other to live. The strange kindness of God is that He does not wait for you to resolve these inner tensions before offering rest. He offers rest as the means by which they are healed. As the heart settles, old wounds rise to the surface, not to overwhelm, but to be tended. Memories once avoided come into view, no longer threatening, because they are now held in the light of grace rather than the shadows of isolation. Healing, like peace, unfolds gently, often unnoticed at first, but unmistakable in its effect. Over time, the soul learns a new rhythm. It begins to distinguish between what is asked of it and what it has assumed out of fear. Some obligations quietly fall away, revealed as unnecessary burdens taken on to prove worth or secure acceptance. Others remain, but feel lighter, no longer fueled by anxiety but sustained by purpose. Even suffering, when it comes, is no longer interpreted as punishment or failure, but as part of a larger story still being written with care. There will be moments when peace feels fragile, easily disrupted by unexpected news or familiar triggers. In such moments, the temptation is to assume that peace has been lost entirely. Yet peace, once given, is not so easily undone. It may recede from conscious awareness, but it does not abandon the soul. Like a deep current beneath the surface, it remains steady and persistent, waiting for the heart to remember where its true rest lies. God's invitation, repeated again and again, slowly reshapes the way one relates to time. The future, once a source of relentless anxiety, becomes a place of cautious hope. The past, once a heavy chain, loosens its grip as forgiveness, both given and received, does its quiet work. The present moment, often neglected in the rush to manage everything else, becomes sacred ground. It is here, now, that peace is experienced, not in the imagined perfection of tomorrow, nor in the unchangeable events of yesterday, but in the simple truth of being held in this very breath. As peace deepens, it begins to overflow, touching relationships that were once strained by impatience or fear. When the heart is no longer consumed with self-protection, it becomes more generous, more attentive, more willing to listen. Others may notice a change before you do, a softness where there was once rigidity, a calm where there was once urgency. It is not because life has suddenly become easy, but because the soul has found a better place to stand. Even faith itself is transformed by rest. It becomes less about constant effort and more about steady trust. Questions are no longer threats, doubts no longer disasters. They are simply part of the journey, held within a larger confidence that God is not unsettled by uncertainty. Faith matures when it no longer demands immediate answers, but learns to live faithfully amid mystery. And mystery, once feared, becomes a space where wonder can return. The heart that has learned to lay its burdens down also learns to recognize them more quickly. Where once anxiety was accepted as normal, it is now noticed as a signal, a reminder to return to trust. This awareness is a gift, not a condemnation. It allows the soul to course-correct gently without shame. Each return to rest strengthens the habit of surrender, making peace less elusive and more familiar. It is important to remember that God's invitation is deeply personal. He does not ask you to lay down an abstract burden, but the specific weight you have been carrying, the one that wakes you at night, the one you avoid naming, the one you fear will define your future. He knows its shape, its history, its hold on your heart, and He asks for it not to expose you, but to free. The safety of this exchange lies not in your strength to release, but in His faithfulness to receive. There is a quiet courage required to believe that peace is truly meant for you. Many accept the idea of rest in theory, but resist it in practice, convinced that it is for others, those with simpler lives, fewer mistakes, stronger faith. Yet God's invitation makes no such distinctions. It is extended precisely to those who feel least qualified to accept it. Grace, by its nature, seeks out the weary, not the accomplished. As the soul continues this slow unlearning of strain, it begins to notice beauty again. Small things, light through a window, a moment of laughter, a pause between tasks, take on renewed significance. These are not distractions from responsibility, but reminders of life's deeper goodness. Peace sharpens perception. It does not dull it. It allows the heart to receive joy without suspicion, to enjoy goodness without bracing for loss. Still, there will be seasons when the burden feels heavier than before, when circumstances press in with renewed force. In such times, the temptation is to believe that rest was an illusion, a brief reprieve, rather than a lasting promise. Yet even here, God's invitation remains unchanged. He does not withdraw it when life grows difficult. He repeats it with greater urgency, knowing how easily the heart forgets where its true refuge lies. To lay the burden down again and again is not weakness, it is wisdom. It is the recognition that the soul flourishes not through constant tension, but through faithful dependence. This dependence does not diminish human dignity, it restores it. For to depend on God is not to become less human, but more fully so, living as one was always meant to live, in trust rather than fear, in rest rather than relentless striving. And so the invitation continues, patient and unforced, meeting you wherever you find yourself now. Whether your heart feels close to peace or painfully far from it, the call remains the same. You are not asked to resolve everything before resting, nor to understand everything before trusting. You are asked only to come as you are, burdened and honest, and to allow the weight to be lifted not by your effort, but by a love that has never stopped holding you, even in the moments when you believed you were carrying everything alone. Even now, as the soul learns, slowly, imperfectly, but truly, how to remain open to the peace that continues to draw nearer, deeper, and more real with every surrendered breath, until even breathing itself feels less like an effort and more like a gift. There comes a point, often unnoticed at first, when the heart realizes it no longer wakes in the same posture of defense. The shoulders do not eyes quite as high with tension. The mind does not immediately reach for worst-case scenarios as though they were necessities. Something within has softened, not into fragility, but into trust. This is not the trust of someone who believes nothing will go wrong, but of someone who knows they will not face whatever comes alone. It is here that many are surprised by a quiet grief that surfaces alongside peace. It is the grief of realizing how long one lived without rest, how many moments were spent bracing instead of receiving, enduring instead of living. God does not hurry this grief away. He allows it space, for it is part of healing. To mourn lost years is not ingratitude, it is honesty. And honesty, when met with grace, becomes a doorway rather than a dead end. As the soul continues to rest, it begins to notice how deeply it had intertwined love with performance. Approval was sought through usefulness, acceptance through endurance, belonging through sacrifice that went unacknowledged. Laying the burden down threatens these old arrangements, for if love is no longer earned through exhaustion, then it must be received freely. This can feel unsettling at first, like stepping onto ground that does not require constant proving, yet this is precisely the ground on which peace grows best. God's love does not fluctuate with your energy levels or rise and fall with your success. It is not impressed when you overextend yourself, nor disappointed when you finally admit your limits. It simply is, steady, unchanging, present. To rest in this love requires unlearning the habit of self. Justification, the inner narrative that says you must explain your worth. Silence, in this sense, becomes sacred, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of security. Gradually, the soul learns that rest is not an interruption to life, but a way of inhabiting it more fully. Work done from rest carries a different quality than work done from fear. Speech offered from peace sounds different than words shaped by anxiety. Even decisions change when they are no longer driven by the need to escape discomfort. The heart, once rushed, begins to move with discernment rather than urgency. There is a subtle but profound shift when one no longer believes that everything depends on them. The need to control outcomes loosens, replaced by a willingness to be faithful in the present and trust the rest to God. This does not remove responsibility, it restores proportion. You do what is yours to do, and you leave what is not. This boundary, once blurred by fear, becomes clearer as peace deepens. Some discover that the greatest burden they carried was not circumstance, but expectation. Expectations placed upon themselves, often inherited from voices long gone, voices that said, "You must be strong, you must not fail, you must not need too much." God's invitation challenges these voices, not with argument, but with truth. You are allowed to need. You are allowed to you are allowed to be human, and in this permission, the soul exhales. The practice of laying burdens down is not a single dramatic moment, but a daily return. Each morning brings its own set of weights, some familiar, others new. Peace is maintained not by pretending these weights do not exist, but by refusing to claim ownership of what was never yours to carry alone. Over time, this refusal becomes less effortful, more instinctive. Trust, once fragile, grows resilient through repetition. There is a remarkable freedom in discovering that God is not offended by your limits. He is not waiting for you to overcome them before drawing near. On the contrary, your limits are often the very places where His presence becomes most tangible. When you stop hiding them, they become openings rather than obstacles. Weakness, once feared, becomes the meeting place of grace. As peace settles deeper, it often brings with it a new tenderness toward others. When you are no longer consumed with holding yourself together, you become more patient with the fractures you see around you. Judgment softens into understanding. Compassion replaces comparison. This does not mean excusing harm or denying true, but responding from a place of steadiness rather than reactivity. Peace within creates room for kindness without. The soul also begins to recognize that hurry was never a sign of importance, but of fear. So much of what we rush through loses its meaning precisely because it is rushed. Rest teaches the heart to linger, to pay attention, to notice what would otherwise be missed. In this slowing down, God often speaks, not loudly, not urgently, but clearly enough for those who are listening. Even prayer changes in this place of rest. It becomes less a list of demands and more a posture of openness. Words feel less necessary. Silence becomes enough. The heart learns that being with God is not contingent upon saying the right things, but upon showing up honestly. Peace grows in this shared presence, nourished by trust rather than effort. There will still be days when old fears resurface with unexpected force. Triggers do not vanish simply because peace has been tasted. But now, fear is no longer the unquestioned authority it once was. It is recognized, acknowledged, and gently redirected. The soul remembers where its refuge lies, even if it takes a moment to return there. This remembering is itself an act of faith. God's invitation to lay the burden down is never revoked, even when you forget it. It waits patiently beneath the noise of daily life, ready to be rediscovered in moments of quiet or crisis. You may find it in a pause between tasks, in the stillness of early morning, or in the exhaustion that finally admits it cannot continue as it has. Wherever you encounter it, the invitation is the same, unchanging in its kindness. As trust deepens, the future begins to lose some of its sharpness. It no longer feels like a looming threat demanding constant preparation. Instead, it becomes something entrusted rather than anticipated with dread. Plans are still made, goals still pursued, but they are held lightly, without desperation. The heart understands that uncertainty is not an enemy of peace, but a companion to faith. The burden of comparison also begins to fall away. When the soul rests in God's care, it no longer needs to measure itself against others to find worth. Each life is seen as uniquely held, uniquely guided. Envy fades, not because circumstances equalize, but because contentment grows. Peace redefines success, shifting it from outward achievement to inward alignment with trust. There is a quiet joy in realizing that God's pace is slower than fear would have you believe. He is not rushed, not anxious, not behind schedule. What feels delayed to you is not delayed to Him. Rest allows the heart to align with this steadiness, to stop interpreting waiting as failure. Waiting in peace becomes a form of rest rather than a source of torment. As the soul continues to lay burdens down, it also learns to receive strength without striving for it. Strength, in this sense, is not the absence of vulnerability, but the capacity to remain open without collapsing. It is the courage to face reality without armor, trusting that grace is sufficient. This strength grows quietly, often unnoticed until it is needed. Even suffering, when it enters His rested heart, is experienced differently. It still hurts, still grieves, still challenges, but it does not isolate. Pain is no longer interpreted as proof of abandonment. It is carried within a larger assurance that God remains present, attentive, and compassionate. This does not answer every question, but it steadies the soul amid them. The invitation to lay the burden down also reshapes how one understands obedience. Obedience is no longer fueled by fear of punishment or desire for control, but by trust in God's goodness. It becomes a response rather than a strategy. Peace and obedience, once seen as opposites, are revealed as companions, each strengthening the other. Over time, the heart begins to recognize subtle forms of burden it once ignored: the need to be right, the need to be liked, the need to be indispensable. These too are gently released. Freedom grows not through rebellion, but through surrender. The soul discovers that it can live faithfully without carrying the weight of constant self-defense. As this freedom deepens, gratitude begins to flow more naturally. Not forced gratitude that denies pain, but honest gratitude that notices grace amid imperfection. Heart learns to hold joy and sorrow together, without being overwhelmed by either. This balance is one of peace's quiet gifts. God's invitation continues to echo through all of this, not as pressure, but as reassurance. Lay it down, not because you are failing, but because you are loved, not because you are weak, but because you are human, not because the burden is unimportant, but because you too important to be crushed beneath it. And so the soul keeps learning day by day how to release what tightens its grip, how to trust what it cannot control, how to rest without guilt. Peace does not arrive as a finished product, but as a living presence, growing more familiar with each act of surrender. It becomes the quiet background of life, rather than a rare interruption, the steady ground beneath changing circumstances, even now. As the heart continues this slow transformation, the invitation remains open, patient, and near. There is still more to release, more to receive, more to unlearn and rediscover. The journey into peace does not end with one moment of surrender. It unfolds through many, each one drawing the soul further into rest, further into trust, further into the gentle realization that the weight you once defined you, is no longer yours to carry, as the heart remains open, attentive, and willing to continue letting go, again and again, into the quiet strength of a peace that is still forming, still deepening, still calling you forward. And so at last you come to see that peace was never a distant destination you had to reach, nor a reward withheld until you proved yourself worthy. It was always an invitation, quietly waiting beneath the weight you carried, patient enough to remain even when you were too tired to notice it. What changes everything is not that life suddenly becomes lighter on its own, but that you no longer in sea. on carrying it alone. The hands that release are met by hands that hold. The heart that rests is not abandoned, but sustained. In laying the burden down, you do not lose yourself. You finally find yourself held in a love that does not rush you, measure you, or demand more than you can give. From this place of trust, this deep and honest rest, peace ceases to be something you chase and becomes something you live in, quietly shaping every step forward, steady enough to remain even when the road ahead is still unfolding.